Right, so the fallout from Keir Starmer's PMQ's comments from last week are still being felt. His flat refusal to call what Israel is doing in Gaza a genocide, and his reasons for doing that being the events of October 7th. And that what happened on that night at the hands of Hamas supersedes everything that has happened since in Gaza, and by extension, therefore, everything that is still to come, because world leaders like him won't work to end it. Having taken aside the side of the oppressor, and will seemingly do so ad infinitum no matter what happens next, not least of which, as people like me will consistently point out to, because in all likelihood of the sizable donations they as individual politicians as well as collectively as a party have received from the Israel lobby. Now, plenty of critics have weighed in on those comments. I've already covered my response to those comments in another video, but now new footage has come to light exposing Starmer's hypocrisy over this when it comes to Israel, and especially over the matter of genocide. Because you see, he clearly knows the law. He just refuses to apply it to Israel. And this footage exposing Starmer's shamelessness is from Starmer himself from just 10 years ago.
The bombardment of Vukovar. This was almost certainly the most sustained attack on an urban area in Europe since the Second World War. The estimated daily round of missiles was 10,000. The loss of life was extensive. The precise number will never be known, but estimates sit at about 1,100. Only 1,000 of the 9,000 family homes in Vukovar were left standing. Essential services, including electricity, water, and the sewage system, all failed. Wells were targeted and destroyed. In addition, much of the fabric of Vukovar's cultural, historic, and religious life was destroyed through the shelling of churches, schools, kindergartens, and public buildings. Ambassador Herbert Oken, who visited Vukovar on the 19th of November 1991, commented that the city was, I quote, completely shattered, and likened it to Stalingrad at the end of the Second World War. Video footage taken at the time depicts a landscape of burnt-out cars, buildings reduced to rubble. Every house had suffered damage. The predominantly residential area south of the river Vuka was flattened. And countless bodies lay in these streets and yards unburied because of the danger from shelling to anybody who ventured out. These findings reveal not an armed conflict directed at military objectives, but a radically disproportionate attack deliberately intended to devastate the town and its civilian population.
Right, so there it was. Keir Starmer, back in 2014, very carefully and deliberately setting a scene of the shelling of the city of Vukovar in Croatia at the hands of Serbia back in 1991. The setting there might be rather reminiscent of the case South Africa brought against Israel, and is indeed still bringing. But for those of us who watched those representations being given by both South Africa and Israel at the International Court of Justice, getting on for a year ago almost now, come the new year, and we will of course remember the submissions being given by numerous legal experts on both sides making their clients' respective cases. 2014 was of course the year after Keir Starmer left his role as Director of Public Prosecutions at the Crown Prosecution Service, and was the year before he entered Parliament as an MP in 2015. And isn't it funny that he refers to that so often, yet here he was, shortly after that role ended at the CPS, as one of the judges giving representations on behalf of the state of Croatia, as he was here, at the International Court of Justice, going over his legal justification for what Serbia did in Croatia being a genocide. If you swap out the word Vukovar or Croatia from Starmer's submissions in that clip from Gaza, is what so many of us are saying now, that Starmer refuses to acknowledge, begging the question that, given clearly he does know what constitutes a genocide, does he believe in the law, or just believes in what he's being paid to represent from one moment to the next? He's being paid there by Croatia, evidently, clearly, we would assume, to represent them. He's pretty much bought and paid for by the Israel lobby now, as we know from the various donations that he has received and from whom he has received them from. I appreciate lawyers have a poor reputation, stereotyped as they are as a profession. But Starmer is that stereotype, it would seem, given his comments now in Parliament and in that legal submission to the World Court in 2014. He spoke of a loss of life in Vukovar of around 1,100. Only 1,000 of 9,000 homes in Vukovar were left standing, he said. A city virtually entirely reduced to rubble, in which case. Power, water, supplies, sewage supplies all failed, he said. Wells were destroyed. Religious buildings and the fabric of cultural and historical life in Vukovar was wiped out through the shelling of churches, schools, kindergartens and public buildings, he said. A landscape of burned out cars and buildings reduced to rubble, he said. Bodies lay in the streets, he said, unburied because of the risk of further shelling. An attack designed not with military intent, but the intent to devastate the civilian population. Textbook genocide then, yes? I'm sure if you watched that video clip as you have, perhaps go back and watch it a few more times. And especially if you've closely followed what is happening in Gaza as well. Every word Keir Starmer said there, every line he attributed to Serbian atrocity can be attributed to Israel, except when it comes to Israel, Starmer will flatly deny it. Starmer, of course, has said Israel had the right to cut off water and power, a war crime he supported them in, and has never retracted or apologised for that, simply denied he ever said it, despite being on film, literally saying it. Loss of life in Vukovar was a genocide with 1,100 people dead, yet in Gaza over 43,000 are dead, 70% of whom are women and children, a war on civilians despite Israel's militaristic claims. Churches, mosques, schools, hospitals, housing, everything has been flattened from north to south in Gaza, as everything gets labelled a Hamas space and therefore legitimised for attack. Bodies laying in the street unburied for fear of snipers, particularly in northern Gaza, we hear stories like that from. As ethnic cleansing goes on, literally wiping out whoever is left. People being told to flee, yet fear the snipers so much, they stay instead. Starmer defends that, though, refuses to define that a genocide, yet did so for pretty much the exact same things, the exact same scenes 10 years ago when it was Croatia and not Gaza. He said a lot more besides in his submission, of course. That clip was only a short segment. Middle East Eye has picked up on this story as well, and they've given a few more examples from elsewhere in his oratory. You need to look at the situation in its entirety, not salami slices of individual responsibility, he, Starmer, said, arguing for the need to establish state responsibility for the conduct as a whole. This is the same argument made by the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, who argued in a report in October that Israel's actions should be viewed holistically as a settler colonial campaign to destroy Palestinians as a group, rather than in the narrow lens of international humanitarian law. The motive of the Serbian leadership was to dominate 1/3 of the Croatian territory. But the means of this territorial acquisition reveals the intent of the Serbian leadership and JNA, Yugoslav People's Army, to permanently eradicate the Croatian population, Starmer argued. Starmer said the Serbian attacks did not qualify as an armed conflict with military objectives, but that it was a radically disproportionate attack aimed at destroying the town and its civilian population. So that's genocide then, right? Starmer is not half as good a lawyer, it seems, as those South Africa hired, since the ICJ threw this case out, not ruling in favour of either side, either Croatia or Serbia, unlike they did by a significant margin within a matter of some 19 days in South Africa's submission to them at The Hague. That excerpt there also brought up mention of the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, the formidable Francesca Albanese, a lawyer of demonstrable talent, not to mention conscience. Currently, she's in the UK giving talks on this situation in the Middle East, and having seen that video footage I've shared in a couple of videos now of Starmer's gut-wrenching dismissal of what is happening in Gaza being a genocide when put to him by Independent Alliance MP Ayub Khan at last week's PMQs, she quote-tweeted that video giving her thoughts on the matter, saying, Prime Minister Starmer's lapidary statement re the Gaza genocide is problematic in at least two respects. One, it gives the impression that what happened on October 7th may remotely justify the military course that has ensued, which it does not in any possible way. And two, it casts a shadow on the ongoing work of the ICJ, South Africa versus Israel, Nicaragua versus Germany, after the World Court recognised the plausible risk of genocide within 15 days from the starting of the proceedings, Clearly the rapidity of the first response underscores the seriousness of the case. I trust UK international law scholars and practitioners will make their voice heard and stand firmly against the politicisation of international law. Having seen that footage both from PMQs and from 2014, it's beyond doubt in my view that Starmer and co are politicising this, shaming their profession as they do so as lawyers, as several members of the cabinet, Nolly Starmer and David Lammy, both human rights lawyers themselves. And if you've not seen the footage of Francesca Albanese being informed that Lammy is also a human rights lawyer, given his pompous stupidity and ignorance, especially in terms of genocide, when he believed not enough have died in Gaza to constitute a genocide, and actually not a single life being lost is necessary to prove that in law, under certainly one of the descriptors in Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, then her face was an absolute picture of shock and hilarity, frankly. This is yet another example in a long list now of receipts emerging, once more exposing how rancidly dishonest, amoral and downright depraved Keir Starmer is. The man has a price tag on him over his views on Israel and Gaza, and as long as it is paid by somebody, he won't budge an inch, save for what they're paying him to have. That's what it seems to me. That's my view of this. Shaming this country as he does so, embarrassing us as a people, and it's not even an issue solely to do with Gaza, because this is a man who will clearly say anything to anyone that best advantages him, and then breaks that promise without batting an eyelid. That more than anything has come to define Starmer as a politician. So really, as shocking and appalling and angering as this video might make you feel, equally, it shouldn't be a surprise to you anymore either. This is who he is. If you've not seen the footage involving Ayub Khan at PMQs last week and my coverage on that part of this story, then please do stick with the channel and check out that video recommendation. Here is your suggested next watch, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next feed. Cheers, folks.